This actual definition came from the Workforce Innovation website. It is a good website. It is very informative. And as you can see, the work readiness, this is kind of a general sense of what the definition is, but necessary for any job. They've been categorized as soft skills, employability skills, and then job readiness skills, and interaction. You know, a big part of it is the interaction with supervisor and co-workers. So that's just a general definition. So we're kind of operating from that general definition when we develop our work maturity skills. There's some good stuff on the internet. So if you Google work readiness for students with disabilities, there's actually a lot more on there than there was 10 years ago. So our research is catching up, thanks in part to Project 10, Intact. A lot of those entities are focused on providing the resources that we need as practitioners. So if you look on, like you said, if you Google it, one of the first things that pops up is this Project 10 employment checklist for students. So if we go to that resource, well, first of all, let me direct you toward the employment page for the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center. This is pretty new. So it is all focused on the workplace readiness training that's part of the pre-ETS and some of the other things that are in there. But it's a really good resource to start aligning. So my mission always as the administrator is what we're asked the question is what we're doing going to align with what happens next in their life, or what's going on with other professional organizations that are doing some of the same things with one mission in mind for the students to get employment. So this is a really good resource for that. Some of our students do actually take the workplace readiness training. I know they do. We are not here to copy that or supplant that. Actually, I'm sorry, we do support that. But we focus a lot on workplace readiness training in our program. So like I said, Project 10 has a really good page for employment, and they are one of the go-to resources. I know that they are constantly updating their website, but if you are fairly new to transition, spend some time. And this is a shameless plug for Project 10, Tracy, but you guys do a great job. You really try to keep things updated. It's not too overwhelming. There's a lot of great resources there, but it's very extensive. And at the bottom of this particular page for employment, you can find our next resource that I was going to showcase is actually where the work maturity skills assessment started. This was part of a TAP. So at the bottom of the Project 10 employment resource page, there is a section that says work maturity training record. And that is part of the technical assistance paper that came out in 2006 for non-paid community-based vocational education. And we still use that term in Orange County CBVE. The actual course that we use is career experiences for that. So again, that's a really good resource, and that is where you will find the original. Well, I say the original was actually back in 1981. I actually tracked it down. It was from the Department of Labor. Same kind of thing. It looks very similar to what the original was, but this TAP in 2006 outlined 22 work readiness skills. And as you can see, the assessment piece is fairly simple, performs above expectations, at expectations, and slightly below expectations. Well, as you can imagine, that's very subjective when you're trying to assess an individual's work readiness. And so what we were really wanting to do is find or build something that was more objective and measurable. So we essentially, in our first round in work maturity skills monitoring assessment 1.0, that's what we did exactly. We actually broke it down into 44 observable skills, and that version was a little bit too cumbersome, so we went to 2.0. So we narrowed it down a little bit, and now we are in 3.0, and I'll explain what that looks like. We are also planning on working on our fourth generation. We actually have already started working on it, and we hope to launch our fourth generation work maturity skills monitoring assessment tool or monitoring system tool in July, to be finished with it, and then launch it in the fall. So stay tuned. If you don't want to get too involved in the 3.0, if you don't want to adapt it or adopt it, you're welcome to hang on until 4.0, and then I can help you. And plus, that ensures that I can have another presentation in next year's next year's session in Orlando. I can have 4.0 session, right? So just to give you a little bit of background about what we do in Orange County, I've talked to many of you about this, but we call what we do is the transition continuum. That terminology is pretty widely used now, but we really want to start. We start in middle school, but with what we do, but it's not very course specific, course driven. They do get some exposure with career ed and self-determination in middle school, but it really starts in high school. And we built a continuum around building the intensity of the programming for preparing our students for employment. Um, so career experience is the course code that we use starting in 10th grade. Many people use this. It's not anything new to you guys in the school system. But it is, the reason I said suggested is because with site-based management for our principals, and they get to make the decisions, we are highly suggesting that they create a 3-hour block that our students can participate in. And many of the high schools that we work with have a morning block and an afternoon block. And that way the students get a lot of exposure. Either they go in the morning or the afternoon. They don't typically go to both, but they can. But our students are getting at least a 2-hour block of work experience. Very basic at the high school level, very introductory, but again, they're out of the high school, they're getting an actual off-campus work-based learning experience. Our department is responsible for making the business connections, and we work with the schools and the community in the immediate vicinity to do that. We are blessed in Orange County to have tons of opportunity for that. And I know in some of your more rural counties, there's some limitations to that, but Orange County is very blessed with the opportunities that we have. In our post-high school is what we call our work study programs. Those are our deferment programs. I like to call them an immersion program because our students are fully immersed 5 days a week, every day, our regular high school hours at the business. So we have a teacher and at least one, what we call employment specialist, formerly known as job coach, at the site all day, every day. They report to the site, their classroom is at the site. So there is no longer a zone school that's home base for that. The business is in all rights and purposes the school site for them. So I like to talk about our philosophy that I preach over and over again. My staff gets tired of hearing it, but efficient, effective, and aligned. That's what we constantly striving to do. Our job coaches or someone are in the high schools, they become familiar with the work maturity, and we do a little bit of training with them. It's the responsibility of the teacher and the job coach working together to provide that assessment piece. But it works out well because if they're doing it well in the high schools, and we try to monitor that the best we can, then we can have that information presented to us when we are making a decision on the criteria for students to come to our work study program, which is again part of the deferment piece. And we have about 150 students this year. And next year, we're looking at somewhere in the upwards of 170 for next year. We typically have at least 15 sites. We lost a few sites this year due to COVID, but we have 8 sites currently face-to-face and 7 sites or 7 teachers working through our launch ed model, which is our virtual model. They still are responsible for collecting work maturity. That'll be a separate presentation, but they do a really good job of, we've worked very hard at working with the parents to develop the job skills at home the best we can. And we do some simulated type things. And I'm going to show you how the class was built for the virtual environment. About 6 years ago, we built we petitioned for a school number, and we got it. So with that come some headaches, but for the most part, logistically, it was getting very difficult to keep track of our students when they belong to the zone school. There are lots of different things that go into that. As you know, you got to have the IEP meetings, and you got to coordinate with their staffing specialists and all that stuff if they still belong to the high school. So years ago, we decided that we wanted to go for a school number, and we did. It took the first few years to the growing pains were really settling into being recognized. Since we are a post high school site, meaning that the students have already graduated or met the requirements for graduation, we didn't get locked into all that accountability stuff as far as the testing and everything. We do still have students, ELL students, there's some accountability and testing there. And we operate for all rights and purposes as a school, even though we don't have a brick and mortar. My position technically is program specialist, but I'm really the AP, and then my ESE director takes on the role of the principal. So we have a good website. You're welcome to peruse that. And it's been a good thing. It's been a great way to get the information out to our parents. So let's get into the nitty gritty of what we call the work maturity. If you want to follow along, I gave you several resources on in the resource page, but the one that you want to look at is the copy of the master. That's the very first document in your resources, and you can see how it's laid out. So again, the idea here is to assess individual student progress. That's the one thing that we're trying to work on, is to get some class data for next year so that we can use this as a tool to measure program benefits. But it is designed specifically, and I don't want it to change, for individual student progress. So it's organized into 4 general categories. The general categories are going to be down this left margin, and these are all color coded. The first one is called employability skills, which broken down into work habits and ethical behavior. The next one is workplace competencies, and that involves decision making and problem solving and communication. And over the course of the couple of years that we've been using this, we really found out that we needed a section that the teachers could add their own goals based on either the work site or or the individual needs of the student. If we weren't capturing it in a section of the work maturity, then we essentially left it blank or gave them a menu for the teachers to pick what some students needed to work on. So that's a customizable section, and it's a short section. And a lot of our teachers use that for tracking some IEP goals. I know we are focused on individual, IEP goals, which is so true, absolutely. but there's no reason those individual goals, if they're work related or work specific, can't be included in that customizable part. And then the last part is self-determination and self-advocacy, and we categorize that in a data chat format. And I'll explain that a little bit more, but we do put a great importance on self-determination and self-advocacy. So we're going to explain that a little bit more. So don't need to go into great detail on this, but Project 10 also has a link to CPALMs for career experience. This is actually our OCPS scope and sequence for career experience, but it was adapted from CPALMs. So same kind of thing. The one on the resource page for the for Project 10 is actually has some great resources that are linked within that. This one does not, but this is very straightforward for the teachers, which is why we were able to develop that. If you'll excuse me for just 1 second, Kim, say hi or something. I'm going to go turn off the AC because I'm sure that's a bother, and it's blowing right out. So I'm sure it sounds like a wind tunnel in there. Hang on 1 second.
I don't know about y'all, but I didn't hear anything. But if it's bothering him, we want to make sure that he's comfortable. I can't see everyone. So everybody doing all right? Getting lots of stuff out of these sessions? Thank you, Ms. Nickerson. I see you. I see a bunch of emoji thumbs up. Thanks, friends. Thank you all.
Okay, I'm back. Hey, sorry. It's very distracting when you hear that. You know, it feels like you're in a wind tunnel. So moving on. Thank you, Kim. All right, so this is what it looks like. Again, pretty straightforward. We have 40 skills. Some of them look to be somewhat redundant, but this was what we worked on for a course of what, 8 or 9 years. And we kind of settled in on these skills. They're divided and color coded. So this is just a screenshot. But I can go at the end of the presentation, if we have time, I'll give you the full tour of what it is. But if you see at the top of here, up in the top of the screen, there's a prompt hierarchy that is, if you remember when I showed you the original work maturity, it was based on above expectations, meeting expectations, or below expectations. Well, this gives more specificity to what you're looking for. Are they prompt, is the student really prompt dependent? Are they just need a few verbal prompts? You know, are they able to work independent? And you can see it's color coded. And so, and you'll understand that in a minute when I show you one that's one that's filled out. But this is just the basic system there laid out for you. So the one thing I really like about this, which makes it difficult to share this, you can download it in an Excel format and have it that way. It doesn't download real clean, so just be prepared for that because it's actually built in a Google Sheet. We did that because multiple people can be sharing information in the same Google Sheet at the same time. So it's actually really neat when the teacher is working with, you know, the same kid for part of the day or whatever. It just lends itself to the community where you can get a really good assessment on an individual student. The other thing I like about it is, which I'll show you in a second, but it's easily shared with me, so I can get in there and get a snapshot of the progress of the student or individual students. And you know, and so if a parent calls me, I don't have to say, well, let me go look, you know, or let me go talk to the teacher, or I'll pop into their Google Sheet work maturity and I'll take a look and say, hey, well, they look like they're doing great in class, so let me find out you know, what's going on. But we keep the master copy on our team drive, and then the teachers just download it, or I'm sorry, share it or make a copy in their own drive, and then they name it for each student. And I'll show you that in just a second. but we do depend heavily on Google Drive. We use it extensively for a lot of things, and this is one of the areas we use it fairly extensive for. So I already talked about the hierarchy system of rating. That's our rating scale. And we ask teachers to collect one data point a week, and it's typically cumulative data. So the teacher will take notes. The employment specialist will take notes. They'll confer with the teacher. They'll decide on what rating they want to give that student on that skill for that week. It is required, and this is another thing we're looking to kind of change, but you do have to score all 40 skills, but you do have a week for doing that. And for those that you're not necessarily that you're not able to see for the week, you don't want to leave those blank, but you can carry over the baseline data to the next week. But again, might skew your weekly assessment or your weekly data, and that's what we're trying to figure out in our next 4.0 model. So you'll get that just in a second. But anyway, so this is what it looks like filled out. As you can see, the color coding is, this is an actual example of a student. This is the first 9 weeks. And you see at the top, it is a student, they were working at the basic, the B means basic. So you have a little level of complexity ruling there. Nice thing about it is, and I'll show you in a minute, you have a whole menu for what the level of complexity, how they're defined. It's, again, not a very specific science, but in general, there's a good way to define a level of complexity for the skills that they're learning. So you can see this student is starting out at a basic level. They have all 6s, meaning they're operating independently for their uniform and their personal hygiene stuff, which is great. Jumped right in, getting dressed, ready to go to work. So that's awesome. Where he's still having trouble, you can see he's having trouble organizing some supplies and completing tasks. So those are the 2s across the board for the first 9 weeks. So in our setting, and what's really nice is if you're seeing that trend line, then you'll want to put in an intervention, take some notes, and I'll show you how to do that on the live document. But because it's a Google spreadsheet or a Google sheet, then you can put in notes and make notes and say, hey, today Jaden was having trouble with following through on a task. And so we created a visual task analysis for him. And then you can see where it goes from there. But you want to enter it into the system itself. So the next slide shows the different tabs at the bottom. They are organized by quarter. And then does anybody know, well, tapping in the chat box, my first question, I wanted it to be somewhat interactive today, but I knew we had a lot to cover. But does anybody know what this 14 number means in Q1? That's worked with Google Sheets a lot. Going once. So that 14 means that there are 14 comments in Q1 for that particular student. So that is something to look for. If you see those starting to pop up, as an administrator, I'm looking for those, because I've told my team, I said, if I see a student making all 2s and there are no comments or interventions in there, then we have a problem, because you keep doing the same old. Tell me what's going on. So as an administrator, I'm looking for those comments and then a change and a progression for the individual student. So it's been very beneficial for me to be looking for those comments, or for them to put those in. The other thing down at the bottom, you can see, so this is just a continuation of the same tabs at the bottom, but the complexity level, it has its own separate tab. So you can just do a quick reference there. And then there's also a directions, videos and tips. So it is a how to get started and it's very very easy to find that, and tells you, gives you the directions on how to get started and some tips, and then it actually includes a few videos for how we've been doing things. So I see I'm at 2 o'clock now. Wow, time flies. So I need to hustle. All right. So this was, I was just going to show you again, is the levels of complexity. They're again at the top: advanced, challenging, moderate, basic, and simple. And then they're defined in the tab for complexity levels. This is the page I just referred to. As you can see, there's some YouTube videos on there, and then it kind of takes you step by step on how to get started with using it. Now, this is what I was talking to about the Google Sheets. They're very, it's very easy to organize them, and the teachers organize them in their own Google Drive. So each one of our students has their own work maturity, and so the teachers update that weekly. And again, great for the admin to take a peek. These documents are live, so it's real-time data collection, which is very beneficial. So I gave you a sample on here of a created one. It's just a 9-week example. And so normally, definitely a student would very likely not be making this kind of progress in a 9-week period. You'd see more like the first one, which we had 2s across the board because they were just now getting used to it. But if you were looking at this one, just standing out, just looking at the color coding, and you're looking at an area, I'll give you a hint for the sake of time. Look in the first area, work habits, and you'll notice down toward the bottom, it's a lot of yellow. He's done 5s in a lot of those areas. He's gotten up to a 5, which means he's working at a more independent level with a few prompts, but he's still at 4s, which mean he needs some fairly intensive prompting to work on those skills there. So for our purposes as educators, we'd want to look at those possible areas as an areas of focus for the goal. Doesn't have to be an IEP goal, but it can be if something's persistent and they need to work on that. So this is Joe. I mean, I don't know about your programs, but I am trying to recruit those students who seem to have made it academically or a little higher academically, but clearly they are not ready for employment. When the diploma options changed, it wasn't that clear cut on who would be viable candidates for our program anymore. So we typically take students from the that are completing access points, but it doesn't have to be. So Joe is a student on the spectrum who also has some cognitive disabilities, again, just made up. But mom and dad approached us about coming to our program because they knew he was not ready for work skills. So he doesn't deal with change well, and he needs appropriate social skills, and he tends to get in one's personal space. And he does not take directions very well. So you can see the scoring is not taking directions very well in certain areas, and problem solving, those things that we would normally associate with a case like Joe's. Yes, are you giving me was that a ding? 15 minutes, ready to go? All right. This is an example of just where I would put a comment in. So it's hard to see on here, but all you're doing is right-clicking in a cell, and then you can put a comment. You right-click, you scroll down, and it gives you an opportunity to insert comment. So I would put in Joe, if he's not making progress over the course of a few weeks, Joe needs verbal prompting to help him with his pacing for, meeting, getting better, more proficient at what he does. So that's just again, comments are important for us to be able to track the progress of our students. All right.
Can I ask a question real quick before you move on?
Absolutely.
Is that something that you would hover over and then it would pop up, that comment would pop up?
Yes.
Okay,
So
it's hard to pop up.
It's hard to see, but in the very right corner of that cell will be a little triangle. And when the little triangle shows up, that means there's a comment in that cell. And
Beautiful,
all you got to do is hover over that cell to pick up that comment.
We had one other question related to your use of this in the Google Drive. Lynn wants to know if this is something you share with parents in real time, or if this is something that maybe you share at IEP meetings.
Both.
So you do have some parents that you give access to this in real time.
You can. So the teachers can share their drive with their parents, with that particular parent. And they can do it in real time, or they can just download it as an Excel spreadsheet. Like I said, it doesn't come out quite as clean as an Excel spreadsheet. But this is a great segue into that, because the graphs are a great tool for showing parents if a student's really making progress. Now, the point spread is not that great. So it's not going to be so dramatic. But, you're looking for plateauing, you're looking for dips. So you can see in these graphs, these are the actual graphs from that first 9 weeks that I just showed you. But clearly the student is making pretty good progress. What it doesn't tell you is it doesn't drill down to the individual skills that are listed, but it's grouped by segment or section. So for the employability skill work habit section, student had a little dip, looked like about week 7 I guess it's 7, week 7, he dipped down a little bit. That's where you're looking at it going, okay, parent might say, what happened that week? And, you can say, well, he was having an issue with the girl at work, not following directions. I don't know, just whatever it is. But it is a great representation for quickly showing the parents, how they're making progress. So I'll zip through this real quick. We have till 2:15, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll cover this part really quickly, but what we did, we wanted to include it when we were already working on trying to put a class together for online. And so our learning management system is Canvas. I don't know if anybody else uses Canvas. It's fairly intuitive. We built a class over the summer for career experience, and it's worked out really well since about half of our students were already, were signing up to be online. The work maturity skills is embedded in this Canvas course for everybody. So it's all there. If you click on this work maturity skills tab, it takes you to a listing of all the work maturity skills. So we linked each one of these skills to a mini module. So you can do a little refresher, whatever skills you're working on, you can go to that module. It'll directly link you to that module. So for example, I am looking at staying in work area. And so there's a little video on staying in work area. You can talk about what they're doing. If that student is having difficulty with this task, you can pull them in, have a little refresher with them, and get have a little talk with them, show them the video, and then they will self-assess. So there's also a self-assessment piece in here. There's a scale that's specific to the level of support they need. Again, aligned with the same scale that we're using in the actual data sheet. And so the student, the one on the right is actually the student, what they click on. So we're recording their self-assessment piece so we can compare the two. So the teacher has a record of what the self-assessment piece, the student thinks how they're doing. And then we can compare that with the actual work maturity that we're assessing and observing for them. So if there's a discrepancy there, that's where you want to have a data chat and say, hey, you gave yourself a 5, but you're really needing a lot of support when it comes to this particular skill set. So that's been really beneficial. This is really cool. And this is one of the resources that I provided for you that is for, there's also a hard copy. So it's in very simple student-friendly language. On the left is the actual data collection or the data sheet where students can graph their goals. And in the top, you'll notice their boxes. Well, what the teachers like to do is they like to laminate, put Velcro in those top boxes, and put Velcro on the back of the visuals, and then they just stick them on for the day or however long they're going to work on that particular skill set, and put them in those boxes. So if they have 2 strengths, and then a goal, something they need to work on, you're going to do that. Most teachers just do it weekly, but they'll come back and visit and they'll look at the graphs where the students are self-assessing. So it's a great way for students who are typically non-readers to be able to self-assess. And I gave you that whole document that aligns with that. Now I have another teacher who takes it even further. We use Marzano, which we have to have a learning scale displayed. So she took it a step further and created a learning scale or learning goal with a scale in a format that the students can understand, that's color coded with visuals. So we've done UDL training out the wazoo, and our teachers are really doing pretty much better at it. So we're almost done. So if you want to try it, I gave you a link. Hopefully it works. It's to my, I had to load it to my personal account, my personal drive, because our other is an organizational account and I can't share that information with anybody. This is a blank sheet. You can play with it, see what it's all about. And then, like I said, we're working on a 4.0. There's some changes that need to be made. We want a point system that makes sense. So essentially what we're doing is standardizing it. When we change the complexity level of a task or during the week, we want to build on the intensity level. So we may change the complexity level, but it doesn't change the scoring or the raw scores for that student. So we're developing it. So we're standardizing it to a point system. So if as the student becomes more efficient in their complexity levels, then they would get more points. So that's really what we're working on now for that. So I know it was a lot to take in. There's our contact information, and I got about 5 minutes for a few few questions. Sorry, I knew it was a lot to pack in, but all right.
I'm trying to upload the link, so hopefully that worked. I just cut and pasted it from your presentation. If folks want to try and play with that spreadsheet a little bit, I just uploaded that for you guys. Linda asks, is your Canvas career experience course shareable or accessible with other districts?
It is not. Sorry, it is built within our learning management system. So it is not shareable, but I am happy to share with you resources and how it was built.
So Kanan, I'm going to take 1 second and flip over and I will put your email into the chat as well.
Okay.
Are there any other questions, folks? Oh, wait, that didn't happen. That was the doc. Let me do that one more time.
There are commercial products out there, that are built into some of the resources that are available now, and but you typically have to buy the complete package. We went out on our own back when there weren't many resources, and then we were kind of in it to the point where, hey, we're in it now, so we're going to stick with it until somebody comes out with a great resource, which we haven't seen quite yet. But this one's easy to use. Our teachers seem to be becoming proficient. Again, still got some subjectivity in it, but it's a lot better than scoring a student on meeting expectations, above expectations, and it's a lot more quantifiable. And we can pass on our information to VR. In fact, we have in several occasions given them more specific information about a student and how they learn. So that's been a really good tool for that.
Well, Kanan, you're getting lots of positive vibes, great information. Thanks for sharing. Looks like something I could apply to my school district. Love this and know it took a lot of work to create. So I want to thank everybody very, very much for joining us. Kanan, big round of applause for your hard work and all of the things that you've done. If there's any other questions, he and I are going to hang out for another 5 or 10 minutes. You're welcome to put it into the chat, or look forward to seeing you at our next session, which starts at, I believe, 2:30. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. I'll hang out for a few minutes if anybody else has any questions they want to ask.